Ananda, in his cultivation of samadhi, as a result of pointed concentration, the practicer's mind is now settled and can no more be troubled by demons. He can look exhaustively into the origin of all living beings, and in his discovery of the subtle disturbance which continues endlessly, if he begins to differentiate, he will fall into error because of the following four heterodox conceptions of universal permanence. 1. By looking exhaustively into the mind and its object, he finds that both are causeless. And since his meditative study enables him to know that in 20,000 eons all living beings are subject to the endless round of births and deaths without being annihilated, he gives rise to the wrong concept of the permanence of mind and its object. 2. By looking exhaustively into the four elements, he finds that they exist permanently. And since his meditative study enables him to know that in 40,000 eons all living beings preserve their forms which are not destroyed in spite of their births and deaths, he gives rise to the wrong concept of the permanence of the four elements. 3. By looking exhaustively into the 6 organs and the 7th and 8th consciousnesses, he finds that the origin of mind, intellect, and consciousness is permanent. Thus, his meditative study enables him to know that in 80,000 kalpas all living beings always preserve this origin and that it always remains, thereby giving rise to the concept of the permanence of the 8th consciousness. 4. As the practicer has wiped out the 3rd aggregate completely, he wrongly thinks that life has ceased to flow, and that since his thinking mind has ended, that which now remains is permanent, thus giving rise to the concept of the permanence of the 4th aggregate. Because of his wrong conception of true permanence, he misses the Buddha's universal knowledge and falls into heresy which screens his Bodhi nature. The above pertains to the 2nd state of heterodox discrimination or samskara, which postulates wrong permanence. Further, in his cultivation of samadhi, which, as a result of his pointed concentration of mind, can no more be troubled by demons, if he looks exhaustively into the origin of living beings and begins to differentiate as he contemplates the continuous subtle disturbance in this clear state, he will fall into error because of the following 4 perverse views of the duality of permanence and impermanence. 1. The practicer looks into the profound bright mind which pervades everywhere and regards it as his spiritual ego. He finds that his ego, which is bright and unchanging, embraces all the 10 directions, and that all living beings are born and die by themselves in his mind, thereby concluding that it is permanent and that all those subject to birth and death are impermanent. 2. The practicer, instead of looking into his own mind, contemplates countries which are countless as the Ganges sands, and thereby regards as impermanent those regions which are annihilated in the kalpa of destruction, and as permanent those unaffected by it. 3. The practicer looks into his mind, which, to him, is subtle and mysterious, like molecules which penetrate everywhere, and whose nature is unchanged, and can subject his body to birth and death simultaneously in every flash of thought. He regards that which does not decay as his permanent ego, and that which is subject to birth and death and flows from his ego as impermanent. And 4. The practicer, who knows that after the 3rd aggregate has vanished, the 4th one flows continuously, will regard the latter as permanent, and the first 3 aggregates, which have already ended, as impermanent. By so differentiating between permanence and impermanence, he falls into heresy, which screens his Bodhi nature. The above pertain to the 3rd state of heterodox discrimination, or samskara, which postulates the duality of permanence and impermanence. Further, in his cultivation of samadhi, which, as a result of pointed concentration of mind, can no more be troubled by demons, If the practicer looks exhaustively into the origin of living beings and begins to differentiate as he contemplates the continuous disturbance in this clear state, he will fall into error because of the following four dual views of the finite and infinite. 1. He looks into the origin of life, which flows endlessly, and concludes that the past and the future, which he does not see, are finite, and that his present mind, which does not stop, is infinite. 2. He looks into 80,000 kalpas and sees living beings in this long period of time. But when looking into the time prior even to that, he sees and hears nothing. He then concludes that the region where he sees and hears nothing is infinite, and the one where there are living beings is finite. 3. The practicer finds that his knowledge reaches everywhere, and concludes that since all living beings appear therein, that is, in his knowing mind, his nature is infinite. As their knowledge, that is, their minds, do not appear in his, he reasons that their minds are finite, as well as their nature. And 4. As the practicer looks exhaustively into the fourth aggregate and finds that it ends in emptiness, he reasons that its end is annihilation, and its manifestation is creation, and so infers that each living being partly exists and partly does not, and so concludes that all things in the world are half finite and half infinite. By so discriminating between the finite and the infinite, he falls into heresy, which screens his Bodhi nature. The above pertain to the fourth state of heterodox discrimination, or samskara, which postulates the duality of the finite and the infinite.